So I'm a little under the weather here, and my voice especially. So I will speak until my voice gives out, and then I'll ask for any questions. Any questions?
Do you need a cough drop?
No.
You need turmeric?
I have ginger lime. Om Gana Timirandasya Himanjana Salakaya Chakshur Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupagada Mayam Dadati Swaparantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Parakamala Sri Guru Navaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagar Jatham Sahagana Ragavatham Vitantang Sajivam Sarvayam Sabadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Krishna Padan Sahagana Lavita Shri Vishakan Vitanscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabando Jagatpate Gopesh Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchako Pachuvascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Putitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Narayanam Namaskritya. Ram Chaiva Narottamam. Devim Saraswatim Vyasam. Tato Jayam Udirayet. Nasta Preshu Badreshu. Bhagavat Shevaya. Bhagavad Uttama Shloke. Bhakti Bhavati Naistaki. Today, December 5th, 2024, Thursday. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Creation of the Fourth Order, Chapter 25, the description of the characteristics of King Puranjana, which is a great allegorical story full of self-realized knowledge. Today we're going to look at text 15, and we're going to go back and look at previous verses, and we're also going to look at a few subsequent verses to get just to zoom out a little bit on this picture, what's being described here. So today's verse, Nilaspatika Vaidurya, Mukta Marakatarunai, Klipta Harmyastalim Deeptam, Sriya Bhagavati Nilaspatika Vaidurya, Mukta Marakatarunai, Klipta Harmyastalim Deeptam, Sriya Bhagavati Miva, Nilaspatika Vaidurya, Mukta Marakatarunai, Klipta Harmyastalim Deeptam, Sriya Bhagavati Miva. Please chant.
Nilaspatika Vaidurya,
Nilaspatika Vaidurya,
Mukta Marakatarunai,
Katarunai,
Harmyastalim Deeptam,
Dataharmyastalim Deeptam,
Sriya Bhagavati Miva,
Nilaspatika Vaidurya, Mukta Marakatarunai, Klipta Harmyastalim Deeptam, Shriya Bhagavati Miva, Nilaspatika Vaidurya, Mukta Marakatarunai, Harmyastalim Deeptam, Shriya Bhagavati Miva.
Nilaspatika Vaidurya,
Nilaspatika Vaidurya, Mukta Marakatarunai, Klipta Harmyastalim Deeptam, Shriya Bhagavati Miva,
Nilaspatika Vaidurya,
Nilaspatika Vaidurya, Mukta Marakatarunai, Klipta Harmyastalim Deeptam, Sriya Bhagavati Miva. The word for word, please repeat. Nila,
Nila,
sapphires,
sapphires,
Spatika,
Spatika,
crystal,
crystal,
Vaidurya,
Vaidurya,
diamonds,
diamonds,
Mukta,
Mukta,
pearls,
pearls,
Marakata,
Marakata,
emeralds,
emeralds,
Arunai,
Arunai,
with rubies,
with rubies,
Klipta,
Klipta,
bedecked,
Yedek,
Armyastalim,
Armyastalim,
the floors of the palaces,
the floors of palaces,
Dieptam,
Yedam,
lustrous,
lustrous,
Sriya,
Shriya,
with beauty,
with beauty,
Bhogavatim,
Bhagavatam,
the celestial town named Bhogavati,
celestial town named Bhagavati,
Viva.
like
Here we're going to find out the difference between Bhagavatam and Bhogavatim. Big difference. A Bhoga means enjoyment.
Means what?
Enjoyment. Just like when you say food that's not offered, it's called Bhoga. Buy some Bhoga and offer to Krishna. And after it's been offered, then it becomes Prasad. Mercy. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. The floors of the houses in that city were made of sapphire, crystal, diamonds, pearls, emeralds, and rubies. Because of the luster of the houses in the capital, the city was compared to the celestial town named Bhogavati. Please repeat. The floors of the houses in that city
the floors of the houses in that city
were made of sapphire,
were made of sapphire,
crystal,
crystal,
diamonds,
diamonds,
pearls,
pearls,
emeralds,
emeralds,
and rubies.
and rubies.
Because of the luster of the houses in the capital,
Because of the luster of the houses in the capital,
the city was compared to the celestial town
she was compared to the celestial town
named Bhogavati.
named Bhagavati.
Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. In the city of the body, the heart is considered to be the capital. Just as the capital of a state is especially gorgeously filled with various high buildings and lustrous palaces, the heart of the body is filled with various desires and plans for material enjoyment. Are sometimes compared to valuable jewels such as sapphires, rubies, pearls, and emeralds. The heart becomes the center for all planning for material enjoyment. Wonderful. Purport. Nilasvatika Vaidurya Mukta Marakatarunai Klipta Harmya Stalim Diptam Siya Bhogavatin Iva. The floors of the houses in that city were made of sapphire, crystal, diamonds, pearls, emeralds, and rubies. Because of the luster of the houses in the capital, the city was compared to the celestial town named Bhogavati. Mukung karoti bachalam hamagayate girim jadkripa tamaham bande Sri Guru Medina Talinum. So, has anyone here ever been to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah.
Everyone except for you. Oh, you haven't been there, Damodar?
Maybe not.
So, it is the capital, the great capital of the great American empire. And there are many wonderful buildings. Back in the 70s, the devotees used to go to the various, call them the monuments, and they would pin people up with flowers, distribute flowers at the monuments, and collect Lakshmi, like the Washington Monument, Capitol Building, the White House. And for many years, we had a program in front of the Air and Space Museum on the National Mall there. The mall is a strip of park with with a street on either side that's not very wide, and there's parking there. And that runs between the Capitol building and the Washington Monument. And that's pretty amazing. That's pretty fabulous. And the Air and Space Museum is the most visited museum in the world. And you find, especially in the spring, when the cherry trees are blossoming, the cherry blossom festivals, those trees were gifts from Japan. And also in the fall, busload after busload after busload after busload of especially junior high and high school kids on their field trips to the nation's capital. And there, right on the little strip of park, the mall, right across from the main entrance to the Air and Space Museum, was the Krishna Fest with Gunagai Maharaj and his band, and a generator, and book tables. And then we would do Harinam there continuously, and we would have dance contests. And the kids would all dance to the Harinam. And the winner would get a free book like Beyond Birth and Death, the little books like we have here. And it was just amazing. You'd have as many as 50 to 75 teenagers all dancing in ecstasy in front of the Harinam party. Never seen anything like it before or since. It was quite the program. So because it's the capital city, then it's very attractive and people go there. And it's very beautiful, the buildings, the Supreme Court building, all these various buildings. There are museums there. There's the History Museum, the Natural History Museum. There's a couple of art museums. There's a Museum of Art. Then there's a Museum of Modern Art, which is the next building. The Museum of Art was really great. That's where we used to always go to the bathroom. And it has these big steps leading up to it. And then you get inside and there's these giant columns and a big dome. And really such types of buildings should be meant for the worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But they're bastions of sense gratification, unfortunately. I remember there was one bank in Center City, Philadelphia. I can't remember the name of the bank. But when you went in the bank, it was all marble and granite, and it was so beautiful. Just that the lobby of that bank was one of the most incredibly beautiful places I've ever been. And I thought, this should be a temple for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but it's a temple to another God, money. Because according to Bhagavatam, for the materialist, that money is sweeter than honey. Honey is very sweet, but money is much sweeter. Taste, having that. Burijan was telling a story about, and Prabhupada was preaching somewhere in India, and they had an arrangement where there was a microphone for the audience members to come up and ask a question. So one man came up and he didn't exactly ask a question. He started into some Mayavadi soliloquy. And then Prabhupada stopped him and said, "Are you finished?" And he said, "No." And then he kept going. And Burijan said he was clearly tasting the sweet taste of the microphone. Not that the microphone or this pop filter has a particularly sweet taste in and of itself, but the taste of being the center of attention and speaking one's bogus philosophy in the assembly of Vaishnavas who were hearing real philosophy. That was the sweet taste of the microphone of which he spoke, and I laughed very heartily when I heard him give that analogy, that the man wouldn't stop. And Prabhupada let him go on for a while. And then finally Prabhupada stopped him and said, "Go sit down." He can't speak anymore. So there are different types of sweet tastes that one can get. But the conditioned soul is always hankering after the sweet taste of sense gratification, of being the enjoyer, which is not the position of the living entity. Perhaps that makes it even that much more sweet, because, you know, the sweetest fruit is the forbidden fruit, right? You can't have it, but you want it. And then if you finally get it, oh, it is very sweet. So the conditioned living entity, he's trying to position himself as if he were the enjoyer of all the facilities of the material energy. But the living entity is not the enjoyer of that material energy. Just the fact that he thinks he's the enjoyer means that he's completely under the control of Maya. Prabhupada explains how that when one becomes under the control, then immediately he's filled with a sense of godlessness. When Maya has two primary potencies, the throwing potency and the covering potency. So Maya is able to throw us from our position in service to Krishna in the spiritual world, and then she covers us up. And what is that covering? That is that sense of godlessness. But there is no God. People say this all the time. There's no God. We're reading Leela Rita this morning. Can you show me God? And Prabhupada says that this is the demand of the foolish conditioned soul. He already thinks he's God. So he says, well, there is no God. If you can't show me God, all right, then I'm God. I'm the enjoyer. Everything is meant for me. That's the conditioned soul, forgetful of his relationship with Krishna. So this whole analogy of King Puranjana is very wonderful because it, through the use of the story and analogy, describes the unfortunate position of the conditioned soul who thinks himself to be the enjoyer. And this particular verse talking about that the floors in the houses of the city made of sapphire, diamonds, pearls, emeralds, and rupees. Rubies, not rupees. Rupees. Rubies. Not rupees. Rupees are not so valuable. Either way, they make a very good floor covering. But rubies. So just hearing this description is like, yeah, sapphires, crystals, diamonds, pearls, emeralds, rubies. Srimad Bhagavatam is really cool, isn't it? And that's just the floors. What to speak of what else is going on? And then Prabhupada, in this purport, he explains that analogy that about the capital city, that it's an analogy that the heart of the living being is like that capital. This is the capital is filled with beautiful buildings and palaces and wonderful things like we were describing the city of Washington, D.C. It really is quite wonderful and beautiful when you see it. It's very impressive. People come from all over the world to see it. It's inspiring, all the granite and marble and the Lincoln Memorial, the giant Murti of Lincoln on his Vyasasan, as it were. And then the one you never hear about, the Jefferson Memorial, is even better in my opinion, because it has and all these pillars around the dome, and it's just like a beautiful, like a Greek temple, or like what you would imagine a beautiful temple in Vaikuntha to be like. But it is not Vaikuntha because it's not the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but good old Thomas Jefferson, who, although a great intellect, was a man who kept many slaves and procreated with the female slaves to produce many children. So Not exactly a man of high character, and certainly no match for the Supreme Personality of Godhead with his 16,108 fabulous queens, and those queens were not slaves or women who could easily be taken advantage of. He is. And they're actually the associates of the Lord who had appeared in human form to assist him in his pastimes. There's just no comparison whatsoever. The Prabhupada talks about the capital being gorgeously filled with these beautiful buildings. And then he explains that analogy that the heart is filled with so many various desires and plans for material enjoyments. And so these plans are compared to the valuable jewels, like the sapphires, the rubies, the pearls, and the emeralds. And then he makes this very revealing statement, the penultimate statement of the purport, that the heart becomes the center for all planning for material enjoyment. And who amongst us has not experienced that? How within our heart of hearts that we're planning for material enjoyment. Not so much for Vaishnavas, but in the pre-Vaishnava stage, in the conditioned stage, the heart is filled with different plans for material enjoyment. Like, but that is also compared to what demons do. Like Hitler, for example, he wanted to conquer the whole world, especially all of Europe and Russia and England. He wanted to conquer all these places and become the master and enjoyer of these places. His plans didn't work out. Another great conqueror was Napoleon Bonaparte, who wanted to conquer, but they were both defeated by the Russian winner, which is very, very brutal. How those people can live there, I don't know. But the Russian winner was more powerful than those armies, and it drove them out. So the living entity is like a little Hitler or Napoleon who wants to conquer everything and everywhere for his own sense gratification, but perhaps on a much smaller scale and not quite as brutal. Doesn't want to kill anybody and everybody, just wants to establish his own position as an enjoyer. And if others are there, it's okay. Doesn't have to kill them. But he may try to thwart them. Just like it has been circulating in the news how the newly elected president has plans to discredit and diminish and get revenge on all people who were his enemies, either in his election campaign or previous to that, who gave him trouble when he was president before, or members of the press who made disparaging comments. All of them, he wants to throw them in jail. He wants to fire everybody that works for the federal government who's not on his side. Because he has all these plans for enjoyment, which include revenge. What do they say? Revenge is a dish best served cold. So that is the conditioned soul with all his plans for material enjoyment. And the heart is the center of that planning. Generally, we kind of think, especially growing up under the influence of modern education and science, we kind of think of the brain and the head as the center for everything. You know, the brain is the real power of the living entity, and all the senses are there, like the eyes and the nose and the ears and the mouth. So we think that, you know, like we're the head, we're the brain, but actually the soul is situated within the heart of the body. But we misidentify with this appendage because it's like the sort of the cockpit where you can see everything and control everything. But really, the heart is the seating place of the soul. And so that heart is the place where all the plans are hatched for sense gratification and becoming number one in this material world, or for at least not number one, in a good enough position that one feels like number one. What is that they say? The man is the king of his castle. He's the proprietor. His house, his home is like his castle. He's the king within, and he thinks that his wife and his children are all his servants. And, there was a book by a guy, his name is escaping me right now, about his father who was in the military, and he thought of himself as like the commanding general of the family, and he was very abusive towards the whole family. And this is a biographical account of his growing up, and they didn't call him father; they called him colonel. So he was addressed by his rank, and not in a loving way. So do you know the book I'm talking about? Pat Conroy, that's the name of the author. A very famous book. The father was like an officer in the Marine Corps, and how he ran a very abusive household based on himself being the commanding officer and everyone else being his servants. Much to the chagrin of the whole family, including the wife and all the children, who hated him with a passion as a result of his lording it over everyone, as if he were God and everyone were his servants. But not a compassionate, merciful God, like God really is, but an abusive, vengeful, wrathful God. Like sometimes in the Bible you find that. I am a vengeful God, I am a wrathful God, I shall mete out punishment. And so people think of God as some like evil-minded despot who's just punishing all his subjects for their myriad of sins. And this is the way it goes in material life. So this is a very interesting thing, how the heart is the real center of, and even in common parlance and in art and in literature, the heart is described like this as well. And people will say things like, in the South, the ladies will say, "That just breaks my heart." When something happens to somebody. And what are some of I got some expressions I wrote down here. Heavy heart. Heartache. That's a big song and a big thing in country music is heartache. Elvis had a song called Heartbreak Hotel. You could just imagine what that place was like. A lot of affairs going on there that ended in ignominious circumstances for the participants. That's Heartbreak Hotel, and breaks my heart. There was one president of the United States who said, "My fellow Americans, it is with a heavy heart that I come before you today." Does anyone know who that was? Yes, LBJ. Another Texas boy. It is with a heavy heart. And I forget what tragedy that was in relation to. And maybe something to do with the Vietnam War. So in this way, the heart is the sort of the center of emotion and feeling. That's because it is the seat of the soul. What is it Hank Williams said? Why can't I free your doubtful mind and melt your cold, cold heart? So these are the affairs of the heart that the conditioned souls become entangled in, which always leads to disappointment and heartache and heartbreak. And so because of the intensity of that experience of sense gratification, the hope of sense gratification, and the denial of sense gratification, or the ripping away of sense gratification once obtained, becomes very attractive subject matter for mundane art and literature. Srila Prabhupada writes about that in the purport to the Bhagavatams, that conditioned souls are very much attracted by these types of literatures, and which describe the dealings between man and woman, or kings and empires, where there's great lust and greed and anger and revenge and killing with swords and spears and horses and armies. And so, therefore, understanding this, Lord Krishna performed his pastime of speaking the Bhagavad Gita on the battlefield, a great battlefield. That was the culmination of the whole Mahabharata story, which is a story filled with intrigue and passion and affairs of the heart and relationships and great empires and struggle for power and envy and all these things. And so that diamond, like Bhagavad Gita, that jewel, is set within the setting of the Mahabharata, which is an extremely attractive tale, a story. It's just, you hear Mahabharata, it's just nectar. It's just so ecstatic, so wonderful, so much intrigue, so much glory. And the whole purpose of the Mahabharata is to present Krishna's instructions in the Bhagavad Gita. That's the real reason. So Krishna does many wonderful things when he performs his pastimes. And he serves many purposes with a single action. And he serves many purposes with his Leela. And so the Srimad Bhagavatam is filled with Krishna Leela, especially the culmination, which is the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, filled with Krishna's wonderful Vrindavan Leela, and then his Mathura Leela and his Dwarka Leela. And you know, in the culmination of, we find the verse that was quoted and was referred to, which is so in the 84th chapter, you have this verse. What is it? Yasyatma buddhi kunupe tridatuke sudi kalatradi shubhauma ijadi jatirta buddhi shalile nekar hichij janeshu abigeshu sa eva go karaha. So go means cow and kara means ass. So yasyatma buddhi, that one who thinks that this body, tridatuke, which is made of these elements, mucus, bile, and air, to be one cow or an ass. And Sureshwar pointed this out yesterday, that this is one of the few times where the cow is not exactly glorified. If Bhagavatam is telling you that if you think you're your body, well, you're no better than a cow. Oh, wait a minute. The cows are there in Goloka Vrindavan, and they're giving milk, and the Sarabi cows fulfilling all these desires. But he's not talking about those cows. He's talking about just an ordinary cow, which developed consciousness. It's in all day and in the else. So thinks that I am this body, Yasyatma Buddhi Kunape Tridhatu Ke Tridhatu. The Tridhatu is mucus biling air. And furthermore, one who goes to a place of pilgrimage, not to hear from the saintly persons there, but merely to take a bath in the holy river, he's also like a cow or an ass, because the real benefit of the holy places is not only to take a dip in the holy rivers, like the Ganga and the Jamuna. Now there is great value in taking bath in those holy rivers. If you've ever taken bath in the Ganga or the Jamuna, you know it's a transcendental experience. You feel your sins washed away. It is very palpable, very definitive. I mean, there's no mistaking that. We'll take the questions at the end. I described that experience recently in a class of jumping in the Jamuna, going down the river, getting up, walking back up the bank, going down 3 times, and then, feeling like then walking was not even touching the ground. The feeling of purification was so palpable and so wonderful. So that is there, but also one should visit the places of pilgrimage, but also one should hear from the sadhus who reside in those places. One should hear transcendental knowledge. That is the real benefit. And such holy places are like power centers of spiritual energy where the saintly persons congregate in order to hear and chant. So you can go to Vrindavan, and like you go to our Vrindavan temple and hear from, there's sannyasis who are residents there, and many sannyasis who visit, leading devotees who have very wonderful realizations, and when they speak and give their realizations, you get so much transcendental benefit and so much inspiration and enlightenment from that hearing process. So Dikalatradi Boma Ijadi, one who thinks that Boma Ijadi, Boma means to take birth, Ija, D means to think or meditate. One thinks, a conditioned soul thinks that the place that I have taken my birth, why is it a holy place? Because I have taken my birth there. I have appeared there. So therefore, it is a holy place. So that would be like me thinking that Camden, South Carolina is a holy place because I took my birth there. Camden, South Carolina is not a holy place. It is a lowly place. It's an insignificant place. As growing up in the South, those of us who were surrounded by sort of the typical born again or right wing, what's the word? Fanatical Christianity with no realization or spiritual practice to back it up, they would be characterized as, the expression was, holier than thou. They thought they were better than everyone else and holier than everyone else, although generally speaking, they're the most intolerant, racist, ignorant people. Like this old black lady one time in the laundromat in Alachua, when in the early days when there weren't as many devotees as there are there now, I was in there doing my laundry, and she was clearly a Christian lady. How could you be Hare Krishna? As if it were an offense to the Christian ethos. And I would just laugh so hard. And then I said to her, how could you not? And she had no idea what I was talking about. How could you remain a conditioned soul when the mercy of the holy name is there? How could you not take it when it's so available? And later she became surrounded more and more by such Hare Krishna people as they gradually took over the town. And I was living in this little town called La Crosse, Florida. It's a very small town. At that time, it was about 150 people, and 50 of them were devotees. So we used to say that it was America's most Krishna conscious city by demographics. It was 1/3 devotees. And there was one devotee living there. His name was Aravinda. It's like we say, Vande Gurosi Charanaravinda. Aravinda means lotus. There's one Bengali saying, Arubindo. And there's the incense, Aurobindo incense. You know the Aurobindo incense? Comes in little paper packages. Been around for a long time, since the 70s. Good stuff, pretty good stuff. So Aravinda, when he was a young devotee, he was actually Prabhupada's servant for some amount of time. And he was doing some agriculture. Big fellow, really big fellow. And a really nice Jewish girl who was a devotee. And I think they were very much into natural living and agricultural lifestyle. I think that he sold that place in La Crosse and he moved up to Nova Scotia to farm. So imagine that, being a farmer in Nova Scotia in the great cold north. Nova Scotia, eh? And wonderful devotee, Aravinda, gentle giant. And so when he was like 20 years old, he was Prabhupada's servant for a little while. Prabhupada had a few different servants. And then finally, he got a hold of Shrutakirti, became his long-term servant, and then Adi Shari. So he was one of the residents of La Crosse, one of the 50 residents of America's #1 Krishna conscious city by demographics. And at one time, 2 devotees were on the city council of the city of La Crosse, which is, I lived across the street from the city hall. This is this tiny little crappy thing, you know, just like a little trailer. But anyway, that was life. Older right-wing conservative Christian people, and they were definitely holier than thou. But growing up and living in places like Texas and Louisiana, we had ample experience of the holier than thous, and therefore that was an expression my mother used. And then when I became a devotee, I added another phrase to the end of that couplet: holier than thou is lowlier than thou. that those who, the more puffed up they are, the higher they think they are, actually the lower they are on the scale of the evolution of Krishna consciousness, or the scale of the evolution of the living in prejudiced and provincial and small-minded. And one thinks one is very great, and that the whole world, there should be rules that the whole world has to follow according to one's little tiny little vision. But as we mentioned recently, that Horatio said to Hamlet that there is more in the world than is dreamt of in your philosophy. So the holier than thous, their vision is very narrow. In Sanskrit, that's called Dhirodatta. Dura means bad. Durlabha manava janama satsange. Or durasheye bahirarti maninaha. That one takes shelter of the narrow-minded things in life. Bahir arta maninaha. Arta maninaha. Arta means the best benefit. One Bahi, that which is external, this body and this world, one thinks that those are the most important things that are of one's benefit. when the real things, the important things to one's benefit, are Swarta Gatimhi Vishnum, that the goal of life is to love and serve the Supreme Lord and become his devotee, and thereby awaken one's true spiritual nature. And then when one develops this spiritual benefit, one is no longer Dhirodatta, but one becomes Mahatma. Mahatma means broad-minded. And the conditioned soul, he wants to be the enjoyer. He may be broad-minded because what? He's always thinking about the broads. But that is not the real broad-minded. The real vision refers to everything in relation to the Supreme Whole Krishna. That is the real expansive vision, the broad-mindedness, and one who sees and serves that expansive, all-pervasive personality of Godhead. And that person becomes a Mahatma. Sa Mahatma Sudurlabha. Krishna says, such Mahatmas, Sudurlabha, they are, it's very, Durlabha means rare, but if you examine the etymology, Durlabha means very difficult to find such a person. Confirmed. So we'll stop here and ask for any questions or comments, because I think my coughing has over. Any questions?
I just have a comment. When you were talking about how in school, we're taught about the importance of the brain, but not the heart, and that just jogged a memory for me of learning about the ancient Egyptians and their mummification process. And I remember being taught how they just pulled the brain out from the nose and discarded it. They didn't save it, but they would save the heart, very carefully in one of the canopic jars. And that was taught to us with those, silly ancients.
Those dummies, they should have saved the brain.
Yeah, they didn't know what they were doing, the most important part of the body, and they've just tossed it out, meanwhile they're keeping the heart, not that the heart is unimportant, but it's, nowhere near important as the brain, those silly
Because the brain,
ancients.
the materials think the brain is the self.
Yeah. And so
The self resides, the consciousness resides in the brain, and the brain is the self. I am the brain. I am the mind.
Yeah. And so I just remember very distinctly being taught that, and just how, basically the heart was kind of whatever, it's just nothing, but the brain, how could they throw away the brain, So
I believe it was Paul Simon said in one song, when I think of all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I can think at all.
yes.
They cram all this information into you, which is either useless or fallacious.
Yeah.
And then you have to survive that and deal with the world at the same time and become a successful human being. No way. Words of wisdom from the poets. And anyone else? All right, we'll stop here. Thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai.